Chapter 215, Color Level Theory. Zhu Tui returned to the dormitory at 7:30 p.m. He closed the door and took a quick shower. Then, he sat cross-legged on the bed and exhaled. He adjusted his breathing and entered a meditative state. This was probably the advantage of a suite dormitory. He could cultivate any time and anywhere without being affected by his roommates. Zhu Tui first entered his true introspective state after drinking a bottle of Level E Energy Restoration Elixir. He tried to use the mind concentration technique to strengthen the genetic ability chain that he had activated under his true introspection. Zhu Tui planned to first understand the problem of strengthening and developing genetic base points that Wuxia had mentioned under normal circumstances. His goal was to strengthen the first genetic base point of the first level of the mind concentration foundation forging technique. Due to his previous cultivation experience, Zhu Tui could still sense and find the first genetic base point of the first level with his realistic introspection. He focused his attention. In an instant, the white energy spots formed by the Level E Energy Restoration Elixir gathered over in large quantities. However, in the next moment, a white curve lit up on Zhu Tui's head in the introspection state. 36 genetic base points flashed on the curve. To be precise, the light spots of the 36 genetic base points and the white energy light spots that surged over formed a genetic base point curve. At the end of the curve, there was a faint white light. 11 genetic base points flashed on the white light. That was the 11 genetic base points that Zhu Tui had obtained from the second level of the Mind Concentration Foundation Forging Technique, version 4.9. As expected, once the genetic ability chain is formed, the strengthening and development of genetic base points will be as a whole. This scene made Zhu Tui realize something. As he focused his mind, a large number of energy spots were injected into the 47 genetic base points that he had activated in an even ratio. Under such circumstances, even if all the energy of an Level E Energy Restoration Elixir was injected into it, on average, the increase in genetic base points would be minimal. According to Wuxia, activating genetic base points for the first time was the easiest. However, in order to develop and strengthen genetic base points to the next level, the investment of time and energy for a single genetic base point would be about 10 times that of the first time. If it was just a single genetic base point, this difficulty was not terrifying. Activating a genetic base point required 2 days for the first time. Now, it requires 20 days of time and energy investment. This cultivation cycle was acceptable. However, once the genetic ability chain was formed, the strengthening and development of the genetic base points would be overall. This was a little fatal. 47 genetic base points, 20 days for each of it. He would have to spend 940 days, which was 31 months. He had to invest almost 3 years in order to make a leap in strength. This was under ideal conditions. Most importantly, the lineage of genetic miracles had the enhancement of introspection and the enhancement of the mind concentration technique. They were stronger than ordinary cultivators in this aspect. What about ordinary cultivators? 5 years, 10? It was all possible. With a thought, Zhu Tui instantly switched to the illusory introspection state. The activated genetic base points in his body were like the twinkling stars in the night sky when it was under the illusory introspection. It was very clear. He had activated the most genetic base points in his head, which could be divided into 3 parts. The first part of the genetic base points in his head was related to the Mind Concentration Foundation Forging Technique. A total of 47 genetic base points had been activated. The second part was 7 genetic base points with unknown uses. One was a genetic base point related to mental perception. This was the first batch of 14 genetic base points that Zhu Tui had activated when he was first injected with the Genetic Liberation Elixir. 7 of the genetic base points were duplicated with the Mind Concentration Foundation Forging Technique, version 4.9. The genetic base point that was related to mental perception was obtained through recklessness. The third part of the genetic base points in his head was the 8 genetic base points that Zhu Tui had activated after he was injected with the genetic transcriptional fluid from the Black Crown Queen Bee. 4 of the genetic base points represented the ability to strengthen one's mind power. The color of the genetic base points was white. The other 4 genetic base points represented the 2 abilities of the mental chain and the mental whip. However, these 4 genetic base points were silver-white. These 4 genetic base points were also the only ones with different colors from the other genetic base points. Other than that, there were also the 8 genetic base points, related to the reaction speed of the nerves in different parts of the body. He had already activated the genetic base points in 10 different parts of the lesser heavenly cycle. The last 6 genetic base points were the flicking technique in his hands and legs that he had activated in the beginning. He activated a total of 77 genetic base points. This was the first time Zutui had examined all the activated genetic base points in his body so seriously. He looked around before his gaze finally landed on the 4 silver-white genetic base points. These 4 silver-white genetic base points represented his 2 abilities, the mental chain and the mental whip. These 2 abilities were currently Zutui's strongest abilities. Does the color represent the level? Zutui instantly had an idea as he examined it. The gray genetic base points in his body were those that had not been activated. It could be seen as level 0 undeveloped. After these gray genetic base points were activated, they would turn white. Then, it could be seen as a level 1 genetic base point. Then, could the 4 silver-white genetic base points that involved powerful abilities be level 2 genetic base points? This was not a theory. This was a bold guess that Zutui came up with based on his current situation. Next, he had to verify his theory. The method of verification was very simple. He just has to continuously inject energy into one of the genetic base points that had already been activated to see what changes it could undergo. There were 2 factors to verify this. The first factor was the improvement in the related abilities. The second factor was the color of the genetic base point. This meant that Zutui's theory was valid based on his own speculations. But which genetic base point should he attack first? Of course, before he made his choice, he had to first understand one thing. Would he be able to provide additional help in the development and strengthening of his activated genetic base points while he was in the illusory introspective state? Would it be the same as when he was in his realistic introspection, whereby strengthening a genetic base point was equivalent to strengthening an entire genetic ability chain? Or was there a difference? It was very easy for Zutui to test this. Under the illusory introspection, his attention was immediately focused on the first genetic base point of the first level of the Mind Concentration Foundation Forging Technique, version 4.9, and focus. As expected, the 36 genetic base points related to the first level all lit up. They directly formed a white winding curve at the head. The 11 genetic base points on the second level also formed a faint flickering curve. However, Zutui was not in a hurry. Instead, he continued to focus. Under the illusory introspection, he focused all his attention on the first level's first genetic base point. This was the greatest advantage of the illusory introspection. Under realistic introspection, he knew that there was a genetic base point that was about to be activated between his eyebrows, so he could only focus on the spot between his eyebrows. The range was about the size of a needle tip. It was very small. Actually, it was not specific enough. The direction was not particularly accurate. However, compared to ordinary cultivators, this was already very accurate. However, the illusory introspection was completely different. For example, there were at least 5 pores of different sizes in the area of the skin between his eyebrows, which was shown from the needle size range in the realistic introspection. However, when he switched to the illusory introspection, Zutui could make the 5 different sized pores into numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. After he chose pore number 3, all the attention and energy would be accurately pointed to the location of pore number 3. But in realistic introspection, when he began to focus his energy on the needle-sized range, he's in fact focusing his energy on the 5 spots. This was the advantage of illusory introspection. It was more precise and had a clear direction. As Zutui became more focused on the first genetic base point of the first level, his expression relaxed slightly, just as he had expected when he was strengthening his activated genetic base points. His illusory introspection could still provide him with additional help. After observing for a while, he quickly came to a general conclusion. Under the state of realistic introspection, the mind concentration technique could gather the energy of the past. The energy of the first genetic point of the first level could be divided into about 5%. The other 95% of the energy was split equally among the other 45 genetic base points. The 11 genetic base points in the second level were slightly less. In the illusory introspection state, the entire genetic ability chain was strengthened. However, 50% of the energy gathered by the mind concentration technique was taken by the first genetic base point of the first level. The remaining 50% were split equally to the 45 genetic base points. His efficiency had increased by nearly 10 times. Zhu Tui was already very satisfied. Moreover, when a new genetic base point was activated every day, the genetic base point on the same genetic ability chain would also take away a portion of the energy. In other words, the illusory introspection state was extremely helpful in strengthening the activated genetic base points. After confirming this, Zhu Tui was about to start verifying the color theory of genetic base points based on his own deductions. He had to choose a white genetic base point to strengthen and develop it again. 2 essential points had to be met for the chosen genetic base point that could be used to verify this theory. The first essential point was that after strengthening, the relevant abilities would undergo obvious changes. The second essential point was the color change. With these 2 essential points as the prerequisite, the first genetic base point of the first level was not very suitable. Which genetic base point should he choose to strengthen then?